Thank you. With victories behind us, popular vote in Iowa and the victory here tonight, we're going to Nevada, we're going to South Carolina, we're going to win those states as well.
I'm Julie Pace, Washington Bureau Chief for the Associated Press, and this is Ground Game. Bernie Sanders emerges with a win from New Hampshire, but his victory is narrow, raising questions about his ability to build a coalition and giving more moderate candidates a reason to stay in the race.
So many of you turned out, die-hard Democrats, independents unwilling to stay on the sidelines, and even some newly former Republicans ready to vote for something new.
Now the Democratic contest turns to more diverse states, Nevada and South Carolina, where Black and Latino voters get to start having their say for the Democratic nomination. Bernie Sanders is the winner of the New Hampshire primary. He won about 25% of the vote, but more than half of voters signaled they wanted a more moderate candidate. They split their support between Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and a struggling Joe Biden. The night had clear echoes of 2016, when Donald Trump succeeded in part because moderates never coalesced around a single candidate until it was too late. There's so much to discuss about New Hampshire and where the race goes from here. Joining me now to break it all down, Steven Sloan. He's AP's national political editor. Steven, we're running a little slow this morning after our late night with New Hampshire.
Thank goodness for coffee. It's a beautiful thing.
Indeed. All right, so we finally got a winner out of one of these early states after the Iowa debacle. What are your key takeaways about how Sanders did in New Hampshire?
This is a state that he won by 20 points in 2016, and obviously he was just going against, essentially one rival at that time, so it's a different story. But this was a bit of a narrow win for him over Buttigieg in a state that he dominated 4 years ago. But still, a win is a win, and this is what Sanders wanted at this point in the race. He wanted to come out of a state with a win. He got it. He can now go into these larger, more diverse states saying that he's a winner and try to start putting together a coalition to, we're really kind of waking up this morning talking about Bernie Sanders could be the Democratic nominee, and that's exactly where he wants us to be.
One of the things that I think shouldn't get lost in this conversation is Buttigieg. Buttigieg a year ago was basically unknown besides, a small group of kind of political insiders. These are two contests in a row where he has either virtually been tied or just right behind Bernie Sanders. What do you make of his standing in the race, and what are his challenges going forward?
I think he is just an impressive political candidate right now, right? And I think that what we're seeing is he is kind of emerging as a little bit of that, opposite, that counter to Bernie Sanders in the Democratic Party as kind of the moderate lane tries to form itself. I saw Buttigieg in New Hampshire this weekend and talked to some voters there. And, people find a safety in Pete Buttigieg. They like the way he talks. He calms them down in these kind of intense political times, which is different than Bernie Sanders, who riles out the progressive base and talks about revolution and things like that. So, I think if Buttigieg can kind of keep that momentum going, he's going to be a contender in this race, certainly through Super Tuesday. But he has some very clear challenges. Most prominent among them, he has not shown to us that he can win voters of color. That is an incredibly important dynamic now as the race heads to Nevada and South Carolina, the first states that vote that have significant minority populations. It does not get easier for him from there as Super Tuesday unfolds on March 3rd, which includes a number of states in the South. So he really has to show that he's doing that. He is getting some endorsements from Black leaders. He got a few this morning coming out of New Hampshire, so he is trying to make that case. But if he can't show that he can build a bridge to Black voters, I think it's hard to see how he becomes the nominee.
We'll get back to where this race goes from here, certainly into states that are much more diverse in a couple minutes, because it's really important where the race shifts. But I do want to also talk about Amy Klobuchar. Klobuchar had this standout debate performance pre-New Hampshire, Friday night, and she really capitalized on it. A strong and unexpected third place finish. But is third place in New Hampshire enough for Amy Klobuchar to really start turning this on?
It is enough for her to raise money. She's going to raise millions of dollars coming out of this. She is going to go into Nevada as somebody that we all have to pay attention to. Is it enough for her to become the nominee? Is it enough for her to go into Super Tuesday? You know, she has a lot of the same vulnerabilities that we've been talking about with Pete Buttigieg. We've been talking for months about his challenges with black voters. Well, Amy Klobuchar has some significant hurdles there as well, and certainly the scrutiny of her relationships or lack thereof with the black community are only going to grow as she kind of becomes a phenomenon in these coming weeks. But this is a really important 10-day period for Amy Klobuchar going into Nevada. She has some wind in her sails right now.
What do you make of the fact that while Bernie Sanders won New Hampshire, Buttigieg and Klobuchar, the two candidates right behind him, are moderates? They are opposed to some of the big government programs like Medicare for All that Bernie Sanders is pushing.
You know, I just feel a little bit like we're reliving 2016, which is interesting because normally we learn from elections past and don't just kind of relive them. But it seems moderates are struggling to kind of coalesce behind a candidate. As you were saying earlier, there were more people who voted for a moderate candidate in New Hampshire than voted for Bernie Sanders, but they're being split among several candidates. So Democrats are going to have to work that out, or Bernie Sanders is just going to keep cruising, and you're going to continue to have this Klobuchar, Buttigieg, Biden, maybe, depending on what happens with him, cluster there.
Joe Biden was hoping to be the moderate standard bearer. He's been pitching himself for a year as the most electable candidate. I think it's hard to really overstate just how dismal his performance has been in these first two contests. 4th in Iowa, 5th in New Hampshire. He didn't even spend primary night in New Hampshire. He moved on to South Carolina. How does he get this turned around? And is there a chance he can get this turned around?
He has one chance. That one chance is South Carolina. And there is a path. You know, if he can prove that he has a commanding lead in South Carolina, which is the first state that votes with a significant black population, and he can harness his support in that community, then maybe he can turn things around and he can go into those Super Tuesday states that I'm talking about of, you know, Alabama and Texas and other places with significant black populations. I mean, he could still win, but if that win is narrow in South Carolina, or God forbid for him, he loses to someone like Bernie Sanders, it's a hard path forward.
So Biden has a path, but a narrow one. Does Elizabeth Warren, the 4th place finisher in New Hampshire?
Well, and I think that's one of the things that it's really hard to see right now. She obviously is building out this organization deep into the Super Tuesday states. She tells her supporters only 2 states have voted out of more than 50 contests ahead. But where does she win? When you look at the map, at some point, even in a crowded race, you have to win. Is it Nevada? Is it South Carolina? If we're going into Super Tuesday, and you look at the roster of states voting then, at some point you have to get a win. And that is, I think, the difference between where she is and where Biden is. Biden's potential victory is in South Carolina. I'm having a hard time figuring out what state holds the same value for Elizabeth Warren.
All right, we've been talking about this pivot in the race toward these more diverse states. Why is that important? Why does going into a place like Nevada with a heavy Latino population, or South Carolina with a large percentage of African-American voters, why does that matter right now?
Kind of quite simply, you can't win the Democratic nomination without winning Black and Latino voters, without winning minority voters overall. They are just a core part of the Democratic Party, and their vote, the importance of their vote, cannot be overstated. Speaking more broadly, the way that a Democrat will win in the fall is by putting together a multiracial coalition. We talk about the Obama coalition from 2008 and 2012. Democrats have to prove that they can kind of recreate a similar coalition. It's been really interesting when we go out and see Bernie Sanders on the trail right now. He is really kind of speaking in those terms. He talked last night after his victory in New Hampshire saying he is the person who can put together this multiracial coalition. It is a talking point that he uses in almost every speech right now. He is really trying to make that play. This is the play that Joe Biden has been articulating for months now, saying, I'm the front runner because I can do this. That argument is looking a little weaker right now.
And the race gets more diverse as we get past Nevada and South Carolina, not less, right?
It only becomes more diverse. And again, as we get into the Super Tuesday alone, I'm not even talking about deeper into March, but March 3rd, 3 days after South Carolina, I believe. I don't have the calendar in front of me. I just know that it's a busy time in my life. But, Super Tuesday comes. We're talking about Alabama. We're talking about Texas. We're talking about California. We're talking about Virginia. As we've been kind of obsessing over Iowa and New Hampshire over these past few months, how overwhelmingly white these states are. We are entering a phase where that is not the case.
And who is waiting in the wings in Super Tuesday states?
That would be one Michael Bloomberg with all of his millions of dollars. He's already spent hundreds of millions of dollars on the trail, kind of just laying in wait, letting everybody fight it out in these traditional early voting states. But he has some problems of his own. He has not been fully tested in the way that a lot of these candidates have been. They've been through like 8 debates now. He has not been on the debate stage once. Just this week, we saw audio emerged of him speaking in some pretty controversial ways about the stop and frisk policy and defending it and talking about, rowing people against walls or cars or what have you. That is a vulnerability for him as he also has to appeal to black voters.
And to take this back to where we started, Michael Bloomberg, also a moderate, another candidate who could carve up this piece of the electorate right now.
This is the challenge for the establishment wing of the Democratic Party going forward. Will there be an effort to say, okay, this is our person? It's either going to be Klobuchar, it's going to be Bloomberg, it's going to be Buttigieg, or do they just fight it out? And if you let it just play out, this is 2016. Remember that time that we had Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio and Chris Christie and John Kasich, and somebody was going to emerge as the counter to Donald Trump.
I remember that time well.
And Donald Trump is in the White House right now.
Finally, as we wrap up, we will call this our political in memoriam segment here. We lost a few candidates, some lower polling candidates, Andrew Yang and Michael Bennet, the Colorado senator, out of the race on the night of the New Hampshire primary. What was their impact on this contest, if they had an impact at all?
Well, Andrew Yang certainly had an impact, talking about his freedom dividend. And he was on the debate stage as the only person of color on the debate stage. Those debate stages going forward, unless we see a huge surge from Deval Patrick or Tulsi Gabbard, those debate stages are going to be all white.
That is really incredible, given where this Democratic field started.
The largest field, the most diverse field in history, quickly becoming essentially an all-white field in a party where, as we've discussed already, this is a party that prides itself on diversity and also needs a diverse backing to win.
Really, just a lot of important dynamics in the Democratic field right now, and I think a lot of uncertainty about where this goes.
That's right. We'll be here.
Steven Sloan, we will indeed be here. Steven is AP's national political editor. Thank you for being with us on Ground Game.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Ground Game. Now that 2020 voting has begun, we'll be here every step of the way, giving you all the news you need to know, twice a week. Be sure to tell a friend about us, and please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. This episode of Ground Game was recorded the morning of February 12th. Some of the details of our discussion may have changed by the time you hear this. For up-to-date developments on all of the news, head over to apnews.com. From the Westwood One Podcast Network.